Tonight, 3 days after his Oval Office clash with Ukraine's president, Donald Trump shows his anger is far from abated. The US president says Volodymyr Zelenskyy isn't interested in peace after the Ukrainian leader doubted a quick end to the war.
He thinks the war's going to go on for a long time, and he better not be right about that.
Here, the Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, tells MPs Britain must lead from the front on Ukraine peace after a frantic weekend of diplomacy. There's an increased sense of urgency brought on by Friday's extraordinary Oval Office shouting match. Russia says Zelenskyy has shown an utter lack of diplomatic skills, but as questions are raised about his future, he told me he rejects calls by Senator Lindsey Graham and other US officials for him to resign.
The president of Ukraine will have to be chosen not at Lindsey Graham's home, but in Ukraine.
And as the war rages on, we speak to the Ukrainian drone unit that commanders say is striking at the heart of Russia's war machine. Good evening. Donald Trump has shown tonight that things remain fraught with Volodymyr Zelenskyy days after they clashed in front of the cameras in the Oval Office. The US president repeated that Ukraine's leader should be more appreciative of American support, hours after he took issue with Zelenskyy's prediction that the war is a long way from ending. But President Trump said the minerals deal is not dead and said he hasn't talked about suspending military aid. Well, let's go straight to our Mark Stone, who joins me now from Washington. Mark, I mean, frankly, what a weekend we've had. We had the bust-up, the blow-up in the Oval Office on Friday. And then, of course, I spoke to President Zelenskyy last night. And then again, we've seen Donald Trump show to us that he is still pretty angry at Volodymyr Zelenskyy. I'm sorry, Mark. I don't think we can. Mark, we can't hear you right now. Let me just see. No, we've got your audio. Yeah, let's just take it back from the top. I mean, I know you heard my question, but I mean, it's been quite a weekend.
Yeah. It has. Look, what I was saying was, if Donald Trump is very often accused by his critics of saying things which aren't true, today he certainly said something which was absolutely true, and that is that things are moving so quickly that anything he says could be out of date almost immediately. He, excuse me, he said in an answer to whether he was going to suspend military aid for Ukraine, which has certainly been something that's been floated today. He said, I haven't talked about that right now. And he goes on to say things are happening as we speak, literally as we speak. So I could give you an answer, go back to my office, the beautiful Oval Office, he said, and find that my answer was obsolete. I think that gives you a sense on the issue of Ukraine, and perhaps on other issues as well, which are hot today, like tariffs on Mexico and Canada, which he says are going to happen at midnight, that things are moving so fast that it could all change very quickly indeed in both those different stories. And I think that tomorrow night is key, because tomorrow night he's giving what would in any other year be known as a State of the Union address. It's that moment where the president goes to Congress and gives this keynote speech. It is a joint speech to both houses of Congress tomorrow night, where he had hoped, and we know this because his national security advisor said it this morning, he had hoped that Tuesday, tomorrow night, would be the moment he would announce effectively the beginning of peace in Ukraine, because he had expected that on Friday, President Zelenskyy would have capitulated, as some would see it, and would have signed that minerals deal. So maybe he thinks that between now and then, now and tomorrow night, there can be some sort of breakthrough. But listen to him talking a few moments ago on all this specific issue.
I want to see it end fast. I don't want to see this go on for years and years. Now, President Zelenskyy supposedly made a statement today in AP. I'm not a big fan of AP, so maybe it was an incorrect statement, but he said he thinks the war's going to go on for a long time, and he better not be right about that. That's all I'm saying.
Donald Trump there Mark, saying he better not be right about that. I did this roundtable with him last night, as you know, and we asked him about what he thought about a sort of a timeline for the end of this war. And he said, look, the way things are going right now and the way that Russia is behaving, I don't see an end to this war coming quickly. And I guess President Trump was alluding to that. There are calls, increasing calls for Volodymyr Zelenskyy to resign. He said in the past even that, look, he'd be willing to resign for the sake of peace, but I didn't get that sense last night that he's going to, budge or succumb to any kind of pressure, certainly not from Lindsey Graham or the Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson. I mean, we'll have to wait and see how he's actually positioned in all of this.
Yeah, look, I think so. The clip you just heard from Donald Trump there, he was referring specifically to an article that was in the Associated Press today, the headline of which was Ukraine Zelenskyy says end of war with Russia is very, very far away. Now, that was a quote from the interview that he gave you yesterday, where he was talking at Stansted Airport. And the context, I think, you may know better, but the context of what he was saying was it is because of Putin that the war is not going to the end of the war is very, very far away. Now here in Washington, literally by the administration, that has been taken out of context, and they are looking at that headline and reading that Zelenskyy doesn't want to end the war. Look, I think, and this is, we were saying a few moments ago when we were speaking, I've got questions for you here, because I wonder whether you think that Zelenskyy is willing to get on television from Kyiv in the next 24, 36 hours and effectively say sorry. And swallow any pride he's got, say sorry, because I think the sense we're getting from here is that in the administration, that would kind of be enough. If he would do that, that would begin to reset the relations. What's clear to me is that the administration here is actually very happy with what they saw coming out of London yesterday at Lancaster House. They are crediting the British and the Europeans, the other Europeans, for that. It is that man there on our screens who they are very unhappy with. And I just wonder whether he would be willing to stand up and say sorry for the sake of moving things on.
Yeah, I mean, Mark, just to answer your question, the man that I saw last night, and we did ask him whether he would be willing to apologise, not because the room full of people there last night at Stansted Airport thought that he should apologise or not, but we specifically said that it was what the administration expected and wanted from him. And from the sounds of things at this stage, and I could be wrong and things could develop and change and there could be a flurry of conversations and diplomacy behind the scenes. He told me that at his level, there has been no contact from the administration. I don't think at this very moment, Volodymyr Zelenskyy is willing to apologise. And so I guess that is the kind of thing that is happening right now, where the administration is expecting one thing and the Ukrainian leadership is not willing to budge on that.
I just wonder whether behind the scenes he is being pressurised by his allies in Europe to find a form of words to allow things to move on from this. I mean, it is clear, I think, that when you talk to officials behind the scenes here, like Western diplomats here, I've had conversations over the weekend where people have said, and they wouldn't say this publicly, but they've said privately, that they think that Zelenskyy did not handle Friday very well. He was dealt, to continue the playing card analogy that Trump seemed to want to play throughout Friday, he was dealt a bad hand in the forum that he was in, the fact that the cameras were rolling, the fact he was speaking in his second or third tongue, but he didn't play it well. I mean, he could have taken a leaf, for example, out of the King of Jordan's book a few weeks earlier. We all remember that, where he was dealt a pretty bad hand. He, in fact, didn't even expect the cameras to be in the room when he had that meeting with President Trump, where Trump was saying he was going to buy Gaza and all the rest of it. What the King of Jordan did was effectively say nothing. And then when he did say a few things, he threw a few bones to Donald Trump. He said that he would take in injured Palestinians, which Donald Trump absolutely loved. You could tell by the way that the king looked that he was deeply uncomfortable, but he didn't say anything. Zelenskyy decided just to kind of like engage in conversation with J.D. Vance. And I think certainly what I'm hearing from diplomats is that was not the right call. And I wonder whether behind the scenes there's messaging going into Kyiv from European governments saying, find some form of words to get over this moment. And I do think Keir Starmer is seeing himself as kind of central to that sort of relationship rebuilding process between Presidents Trump and Zelenskyy. But there is actually a, just briefly, I don't know if we've got it, but Zelenskyy in the past couple of hours has tweeted with something that to me sounds more conciliatory. He said, we continue to work with our partners. We've already had talks and other steps to come soon. He goes on to say it's very important that we try to make our diplomacy really substantive to end this war the soonest possible. We need real peace, and Ukrainians want it more than most because the war ruins our cities and towns. We lose our people. He's kind of borrowing Donald Trump's phraseology there, where Trump has continually said mostly it's about the people that are dying. And he goes on to say we need to stop the war and guarantee security. We're working together with America and our European partners to make this happen. Peace is needed as soon as possible. So that's a very different sentiment to the perhaps slightly out of context headline from the Associated Press.
Yeah, as you say, incredibly tense times right now where things can be taken out of context, and Volodymyr Zelenskyy deliberately only spoke in Ukrainian. Even when journalists in the room asked him to try and speak in English, he said no, he was more comfortable speaking in Ukrainian. Mark, thank you so much for all of your analysis there. Well, for his part, President Zelenskyy has been trying to move on from Friday's disastrous confrontation in Washington, which left allies and enemies alike questioning if he's now fighting for his job as well as the war. Speaking to President Zelenskyy last night, I found him defiant. And when I asked him whether he would resign, he reiterated that he could go if Ukraine is allowed to join NATO. Have a listen.
In regard to my resignation, if I am to be changed, and I'll hear what's happening with the support to change me, it will not be easy, because it is not enough to simply hold elections. You would need to prevent me from participating in the elections, and it will be a bit more difficult. They will have to negotiate with me. And I said that I'm exchanging it for NATO membership, and then it means I have fulfilled my mission. There is NATO, it means I fulfilled my mission.
And he had this to say to US officials, including Republican Senator Lindsey Graham, who believed the Oval Office blow-up signalled the end of his political career. Have a listen.
Lindsey Graham, дуже хороший хлопець, дуже правильний.
Lindsey Graham is a very good guy, very nice. And speaking on who must be the president and whether I shall resign, I can give him the citizenship of Ukraine, he'll become a citizen of our country, and then his voice will start to gain weight. I will hear him as a citizen of Ukraine on the topic of who must be the president. But Lindsey Graham represents the party that fights for democratic values. And anyway, the president of Ukraine will have to be chosen not at Lindsey Graham's home, but in Ukraine.
That was President Zelenskyy speaking to me yesterday, well, fresh from unveiling what he called a European-led coalition of the willing to enforce any peace deal in Ukraine. Today, the Prime Minister told MPs Britain must lead from the front. But what would any of it mean if the US isn't involved? Our Deputy Political Editor Sam Coates reports.
Take that, give it a spin. Give it a spin, yes.
Keir Starmer is seizing the moment to become a major cog in global affairs. Here, hosting apprentices from the defence industry, hours after hosting a major summit of European leaders. International plaudits yesterday for placing Britain at the forefront of the coalition aiming to secure peace in Ukraine.
And now we're going to give you a lot more work. Yes.
I call the Prime Minister.
Today, his focus improving his standing at home.
Less than a week since I called on this House to show the courage of our predecessors, we see clearly before us the test of our times, a crossroads in our history.
As he spoke, President Trump was launching another tirade against President Zelenskyy, the Prime Minister walking a difficult tightrope.
I also welcome the President's continued commitment to that peace, which nobody in this House should doubt for a second is sincere.
The peace plan will likely mean British boots on the ground in Ukraine. For the Prime Minister, it's a necessary show of strength.
So a strong peace, a just peace, a lasting peace, that has now to be our goal. It is vital, It is in our interests, and its pursuit Britain will lead from the front. We must now win the peace.
Kemi Bedrock.
Agreement across the chamber.
There are, of course, many areas where the Prime Minister and I disagree, but now is the time for us to discuss where we do agree. At times like these, it is so important that we stand together to defend shared values and the fundamental, basic principle that aggressors should not win.
There were occasional criticisms, some on his own side not happy about cutting foreign aid to fund defence spending.
Does the Prime Minister understand the concern of so many that these cuts could, in fact, in the long term, hobble the very leadership that the Prime Minister has shown this weekend?
The PM's new man in Washington already under fire too for suggesting Ukraine lays down its arms at once.
Mr. Speaker, many of us were confused by Lord Mandelson's comments yesterday. So can the Prime Minister confirm that they do not represent government policy?
The Prime Minister swerved the challenges and was mostly able to enjoy that rare common scene, unity.
I find myself in the strange and rather uncomfortable position of very much agreeing with the Prime Minister on everything he has said. I think this weekend he has not really put a foot wrong.
It's been good to have him agreeing with me. We should do this more often.
The Commons united behind the Prime Minister today, just as problems started to emerge. Keir Starmer told MPs that he needs more from the US to guarantee Ukraine's security than a minerals deal alone. Meanwhile, President Trump launched a blistering attack against President Zelenskyy. He's leading the European response, but it feels like a race against time before the White House could pull the plug. President Trump's closest ally in Parliament thinks Friday's White House row actually leaves peace closer than ever.
Zelenskyy needed to wake up and smell the coffee. And since that meeting, he's done so. But the upshot of it is the minerals agreement will be signed within the next week or 2 weeks. And that'll be the first step towards a ceasefire and a peace agreement.
A ceasefire within days has been floated by the French. Pressure is mounting from America. Can the Prime Minister keep everyone on board? Sam Coates, Sky News, Westminster.
Well, for more analysis, let's bring in our chief political correspondent, John Craig, who joins me now from Downing Street. And John, praise there, rare praise there for the Prime Minister from the opposition. He has, for the last week or so, had a very good week and has come across as sort of the grown-up in the room.
Well, he, of course, hosted that big summit here in London at the weekend. Yes, he's become a sort of unofficial leader of Europe. This despite the fact, of course, that Britain left the European Union in 2016. In his interview with Sky News, Nigel Farage was suggesting that he was in a good position because of Brexit. He would say that, wouldn't he? But Mr Farage was saying that because of Brexit, Sir Keir and the UK can become that bridge between the United States, Europe and Ukraine. Now, there's no doubt that Mr Sir Keir has been a key figure both in his telephone diplomacy. He rang both President Trump and President Zelenskyy after that dreadful car crash of a clash at the Oval Office on Friday. And he's had all sorts of bilaterals over the weekend with key allies, as well as hosting that summit. Now, he said a couple of times today, Britain will lead from the front. He was at pains to stress that this coalition of the willing, British troops and perhaps joined by the French in Ukraine, is some way off. But he certainly is having a big impact on all the developments. He's emerged as a key player, if not the leading player in Europe, certainly. Now, he didn't have it all his own way in the Commons this afternoon, because as we've heard, there were complaints from some Labour MPs about the cut of spending on overseas aid. The Tories repeated their demands to go up to 3% of GDP spending on defence. And about halfway through, Stephen Flynn, who is the leader of the SNP, Scottish National Party in Westminster, quizzed him about suggestions that the United States may be about to withdraw aid to Ukraine. Well, he brushed that aside, but it seems that perhaps Mr. Flynn may have been onto something there. He was also quizzed, the PM, about Peter Mandelson, Lord Mandelson, the ambassador's remarks, where he was suggesting that it should be that Ukraine should agree to a ceasefire first, not government policy, government ministers have been saying all day. So he's, as we've said many times, he's walking a very delicate tightrope, trying to second guess all the time what Mr. President Trump's next move is. But it does seem that things are starting to move more quickly, possibly more quickly than the Prime Minister would wish. There is another summit of European leaders later this week. But that is an EU event, so the Prime Minister is unlikely to be attending that. John Healey, the British Defence Secretary, is going to Washington on Wednesday for talks with his opposite number, that's Pete Hegseth. So things are moving very fast. But as for the Prime Minister, he certainly has pleased not only his own MPs with his very sturdy and solid performance over the past few days, starting with his visit to the White House last Thursday, and then his conference and his summit over the weekend, and all his delicate diplomacy. And to get all the sort of comments that he got from some opposition MPs, including real sworn enemies, if you like, Kemi Badenoch and others on the opposition side. Tom Tugendhat, another Tory leadership contender, talking about how he spoke for Britain. So there was real unity in the House of Commons. That, MPs will say, is a very good thing, but there's still an awful lot to do, and the Prime Minister is going to be severely put to the test over the next few days as he attempts to be that bridge between Europe, Ukraine and the United States.
Yeah, absolutely. John, thank you so much for bringing us up to date there. Well, joining me now is Julianne Smith, a former US ambassador to NATO under the Biden administration. Ambassador, thank you very much for joining us here on the programme. I want to get to the substance in a moment, but I first want to get your reaction to what we saw unfold in the Oval Office on Friday.
Well, it was very painful to watch, quite frankly, because as you well know, for the last 3 years, the United States has been absolutely aligned with Ukraine in its determination to push Russia out of its sovereign territory. And I played a small part in supporting Ukraine while I was at the NATO alliance. And so watching the president of the United States now have this complete catastrophic explosion with Zelenskyy and essentially break the relationship and side more with Russia in this moment. I mean, it's a 180-degree shift in America's position vis-a-vis Ukraine.
Do you have regrets, and do you think the Biden administration has regrets? Because there was an opportunity to properly empower Ukraine over the course of the last 3 years. And sure, the United States has provided a lot of military support and aid, but I've been on the ground in Ukraine, and you could see where there were serious gaps with the weapons they were given and the delays that we saw on the ground and the way that Russia was able to mobilize as a result of infighting that we saw over the course of the last couple of years in Congress over this issue as well.
Personally, I'm very proud of the work that the Biden administration did to support Ukraine, the critical military support that was provided, but also the economic and humanitarian support. I will say two things. One, of course, some of the weapon systems could have been delivered with greater speed. And we can look back with 2020 hindsight and look at a couple of instances where some of that assistance could have arrived inside Ukraine in a much shorter period period of time. The second thing I would mention is that we had a big debate with our friends in Europe about the prospect of potentially seizing the $300 billion in frozen Russian assets and utilizing them to support Ukraine. At the end of the day, collectively, neither Europe nor the United States were able to reach a joint position on that. I think that decision urgently needs to be readdressed, and Europeans should look long and hard about the prospect of now seizing those assets to flow maximum amount of assistance to Ukraine at this very critical moment where U.S. support, quite frankly, hangs in the balance. We'll be hearing from President Trump tomorrow night during his joint address to Congress, and I do wonder whether or not there will be some breaking news on the U.S. halting all assistance that still continues to flow to Ukraine to this day.
What is your prediction then, if that does happen, if that aid is halted? Where do you think that leaves Ukraine, its fight against Russia, and the negotiation?
I think it puts Ukraine in a very weak position as it heads into some future negotiation, and it would, in essence, signal to Moscow that the United States is ready to put its thumb on the scale and side 100% with Russia. The best outcome here would be that, yes, of course, Ukraine and the United States would find a way in the days ahead to recover from what happened on Friday, that the United States would decide to continue to flow military assistance, that Europe would increase its assistance to Ukraine as well, and that both Russia and Ukraine can come to the table together and begin negotiations, which could take a very long time. I am not of the mind that these negotiations will lead to a ceasefire overnight. President Trump often talks about the prospect of getting this done within days. I'm very skeptical about that. So the most optimal scenario for Ukraine is that it can continue to fight while its diplomats are at the table beginning the process of what will likely be a fairly lengthy set of negotiations.
Ambassador, really good to talk to you. Thank you very much for joining us here on the programme.
Thank you.
Well, listening to all of that in Kiev was Ukrainian MP Yahor Cherniev, who's head of the Ukrainian delegation to NATO Parliamentary Assembly and deputy chairman of the Committee on National Security, Defence and Intelligence. Thank you so much for joining us here on the programme, Mr. Cherniev. Just your assessment of this current moment over the course of the last 3 years. Initially, we saw the overwhelming support from the United States and Europe to Ukraine. And then there have been moments of frustration, certainly from President Zelenskyy, when we saw the weapons taking their time to arrive to Ukraine. And now we've seen this blow up at the Oval Office, and we're not quite sure where the United States now sits. I met with President Zelenskyy yesterday, who said he wasn't going to be pressurized to resign by citizens of other countries. And then, of course, the Europeans are scrambling to take a leading role in all of this.
Well, actually, in Oval Office, our president represents our country. So this pressure was not to our president, it was pressure to our country. And actually, Zelenskyy defended our interests, and his support and his ratings in our country have increased and after this situation. But of course, we still consider the US as our strategic partner, and we believe that we will find a way how to normalize relations with Trump administration. And as an ambassador just said in your interview, that US continues send a weapon according to the Biden decisions, and we still get this weapon, and we really rely on our partner, the US. So I hope that
States, if Donald Trump, announces potentially tomorrow that he's going to halt those weapon supplies, is Ukraine ready for it? Does it have a plan B? are you now positioning yourself in that way?
Well, first of all, we are thankful to our European partners that stand with us and stay with us, and already is working on some plans for financing Ukraine. We understand that Europe doesn't produce so many weapons and so many types of weapons as US can, but we in Ukraine increased our own production several times. And we, unfortunately, we don't have enough financing actually. We can produce it. We already produce the shells, drones, armored vehicles, missiles, artillery systems, and we can produce even more if we will have some financing from our European partners. So I think
you
it's
can do
one
it
of
without,
the options how we can survive, actually.
Do you think you can do it without the United States?
As I said, is it an option how we can survive for some period of time if we would not have the US support? But probably one of the main problems for us will stay its air defense systems, air defense missiles, because only 3 countries can produce missiles for Patriots. It's US, Germany, and Japan. Japan and Germany still are ready to provide us with these missiles, but unfortunately they can produce a very few pieces of these missiles. So probably this is one of the main problems and bottlenecks that we have with the US weapon.
Mr. Cherniev, really fascinating talking to you. Thank you so much for joining us here on the programme.
Thank you.
You're watching The World with me, Yalda Hakim. Still to come on the programme, launching long-range attack drones on secret missions to strike Russian targets deep inside their territory. We see how Ukraine is exploiting its technological advantage.
I'm Deborah Haynes, Sky Security and Defence Editor.
The reality of life under Russian fire.
People don't want to leave even though help is here to evacuate them. They say they want to sort out their belongings first. It's absolute chaos.
Fire, shouts the commander. There's a dash to safety as Russian drones will be trying to find this position.
We've now got to wait inside the shelter to see if there is incoming. I've been covering Russia's full-scale war since it began, witnessing the terror and the trauma.
When rockets fall, I try to hide my head under my toys.
Illustrating Ukraine's lost childhood, hopes and dreams framed by war.
Conflict in the Middle East is another major focus.
An incredibly dangerous moment.
We saw the missiles streaking across the sky. We saw the intercept going up, and then we saw the explosions when the intercepts were successful. With global threats rising, I also explored defence and security in the UK and across NATO.
This US aircraft carrier is operating in European waters in a deliberate show of force.
This is routine training for NATO. But should Russia's war with Ukraine escalate significantly, pilots like these could be called upon to go into combat for real.
Tucked away in the National Archives are some of the UK's old defence plans.
The scale of this bunker underlines how seriously governments took the threat of nuclear attack and global conflict. Should allies listen to Vladimir Putin's sabre-rattling?
No, they shouldn't, and they don't.
Sky News, the full story first.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story. I'm ready. Are you? Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.
We're rolling.
Welcome to the world.
Our new podcast, starting now. It's very exciting.
Every week, we'll be reporting from the world's trouble spots.
We get to hold those in positions of power accountable, and we get to ask the questions that the audience, the listeners, want to know about.
And that's why it is so important that people tune in, come along for the road, come along for the journey. It'll be fun.
Sky News get the full story first.
Is this now all your territory?
Yeah. The battlefield is outside the barricades. We are in the middle of a forest, in a jungle really, and they're attempting to keep these men alive. I'm Stuart Ramsey, and I'm Sky's chief correspondent. It's really dangerous. Many people have died riding it.
Welcome back to the world. So much of the focus on Ukraine in recent days has been on diplomacy or lack thereof. But the war grinds on, and recently not in Ukraine's favour. Our security and defence editor Deborah Haynes gained rare access to a secret drone unit to see how Ukrainian forces are getting an edge.
Ukraine's secret weapon against Russia's war. Each drone is a one-way bomb that can fly hundreds of miles inside enemy territory. Sky News was given rare access to a launch, but was asked to blur sensitive details. Suddenly, there's an air raid alert. Shelter, he shouts.
There are air raid sirens going off right now. We've been told that this area where we are is a top target for Russia.
After the all clear, the mission is back on. They carefully prepare the first drone. The aircraft speeds into the darkness. The night sky, a helpful cover to avoid detection. Minutes later, another drone is ready to launch. We're told the target is a Russian ammunition depot.
Top secret attacks like this are a key part of the war, with Ukraine sending drones armed with explosives to strike targets deep inside Russia and Russian-occupied territory.
This is machine warfare in action, an irreversible evolution that favours the innovators.
Every time we want to stop the war, but we want to win, of course, but we want to stop this disaster.
We've distorted the commander's voice to protect his identity. He says his drones have a success rate of 70 to 80%.
We change the war with these drones because we can show them that the war can come in their houses, in their towns, cities.
Ukraine has been developing drones for deep strikes since 2022 as a novel way to fight Russia's more powerful military. Production of unmanned aircraft like these has jumped from around 5 a month to over 500, with the monthly target this year set to expand to more than 2,000. The tempo of the strikes is also rising.
Russia is finding it increasingly difficult to conceal the extent of the damage.
At a secret location, we spoke to the officer coordinating the deep drone strikes by Defence Intelligence.
Headquarters have been hit, command structures weakened, and panic is spreading among their officers. Compared to a year ago, conducting full-scale combat operations has become significantly more challenging for them.
These men from Ukraine's military intelligence pilot one of the drones. They say careful planning is key to identify targets and know when to strike. We were asked to remove the sound here for security reasons. The aircraft takes off. About 10 are launched in total from this location alone. Ukraine is said to be leading the world with this kind of technology. A rare advantage it's keen to exploit. Deborah Haynes, Sky News, Ukraine.
This is The World with me, Yalda Hakim. Next up on the programme, more of what Ukraine's president said to me after rallying European support following his disastrous White House meeting. Stay with us for that.
we are under Israeli military restrictions in terms of some of the things that we can film, but it's important to be in there. What a slow drive for the president as he approaches his golf club. 4 more years! Free wherever you get your news. I'm Mark Stone and I'm Sky's correspondent based here in Washington, D.C.
Welcome back to the programme. At the start of the show, I brought you some of what President Zelenskyy said to me and other journalists after his meeting with European leaders in London. Here's more of that Q&A session.
Hi. Hello. Volodymyr Zelenskyy would have known his trip to the White House was likely to be challenging. But no one could have predicted just how contentious it was going to be.
We're late? No, you're just great.
But while the toll of the last few days can't be underestimated, as we sat down with the Ukrainian leader at the end of his emergency trip to the UK, there was a palpable sense of relief following the reassurance that Europe stands with him.
Okay.
Did you feel that in some way you had mishandled the president? There was something you had done that was wrong, and do you regret that? Or if you don't, do you think that you walked into an ambush?
Я не вважаю, що це правильно, коли
I do not believe it is right when such conversations are absolutely open because the emotions or information, etc., the foes can take advantage of them. Therefore, the format of what happened, I do not think that it brought something positive or additional to us as partners.
Я не думаю, що в такому форматі слід продовжувати.
I do not want to discuss what happened. I wouldn't want to talk about why this happened. I just want to underscore while I also understand. I do not think that we will carry on in such format to build strong relations. I'm sure that this situation will pass by, and in the future there are more important things. And if we're constructive, the positive results will come.
Я говорив це колегам, що
I said this to the colleagues. President Trump wants to end the war. Together with Europe and with us, they can force Putin to end the war. I said that for everyone, it would be a failure if, for example, Ukraine is forced into a ceasefire without any serious security guarantees. And you can imagine that a week later, the Russians will shoot at us and we will shoot back.
Has there been any communication with the administration since the Oval Office meeting? Have they reached out to you? And separately, you talked about resignation a few days ago. How are you thinking about elections?
Я. Ну, комунікації є.
There is communication,
Не на моєму рівні.
but not on my level.
Да. А що стосується
Yes, in regard to my resignation, if I am to be changed, and I'll hear what's happening with the support to change me, it will not be easy, because it is not enough to simply hold elections. You would need to prevent me from participating in the elections, and it will be a bit more difficult. They will have to negotiate with me. And I said that I'm exchanging it for NATO membership, and then it means I have fulfilled my mission. There is NATO, it means I fulfilled my mission. Although, honestly, it looks like the people, and I will not be naming their posts, but the citizens of other countries are telling Ukrainians which president they should have. Especially if these people occupy official posts, it seems to me a bit undemocratic and unconstructive. We are speaking about the values, and it definitely looks undemocratic. Although I am openly saying maybe it is a solution for Putin, for everybody, if I'm not that flexible as they say. I'm exchanging it for NATO.
How do you manage to keep your spirits up after a meeting such as in the Oval Office?
I don't have a right to be anything else. Secondly, look at the assistance we are getting. If we don't keep spirits up, then we will let everyone down. Europe and everybody else, everyone in Ukraine and everybody else who's been supporting Ukraine. Not only with words, but everything else, with emotions, with money, with weapons, etc. We are receiving support from the world, otherwise we'll be letting the world down.
Thank you so much. All the best.
Zelensky's time in the UK is now over. From here, he will return to Kiev and a country in their third year of war. The diplomatic war taking place in the West also seems far from over.
You're watching The World with me, Yalda Hakim. Next up on the programme, we'll have a look at how Russia might be viewing everything that's happened over the past few days.
We arrive. A secret hospital hidden in the Myanmar jungle, treating the victims of this bloody war.
This is Myanmar today. Its military rulers don't want the world to see, but we have.
I fight for my own future. I fight for my generation's future.
This is an actual crime.
They don't care for that.
Myanmar army is only a couple of kilometers away. So this is a major humanitarian disaster.
Once almost lost, these denizens of the deep are back.
The problem for these whales is global warming. Water temperatures are rising.
We're worried that the animals are actually starting to starve.
Deadly and outdated. What do you think should happen to the nets?
I would like to see them go.
I'm Nicole Johnston, Sky's Asia correspondent, based here in Beijing. A towering monument to the China dream and its demise. From one end of this country to the other, China is littered with real estate that's falling apart. China is facing a tsunami of the elderly.
We have to work as long as health allows, otherwise, no money.
China is under pressure to pay for the pensions of 500 million retirees. I've reported on a wide range of stories from around the world.
Mass protests forced the president to flee.
The sight of the president's private swimming pool only reinforces to Sri Lankans the great divide here between rich and poor.
Aid groups say Gaza is now the world's most dangerous place to be a child.
The Israeli army has raided towns and villages all over the West Bank. These tunnels run all over Gaza. The Gaza Strip is ridden with them.
A referendum designed to unite the country has only deepened its divide.
Sydney's floodplains underwater again. This is the third or fourth time in the 18 months that their homes have gone under. Sky News, the full story first. It may seem like a gimmicky toy, but it is part of the global race between the United States and China for new technology. This elite engineering, designed to humour and to help us.
Sky News get the full story first.
Is this now all your territory?
Yeah. The battlefield is outside the barricades. We are in the middle of a forest, in a jungle really, and they're attempting to keep these men alive. I'm Stuart Ramsey, and I'm Sky's chief correspondent. It's really dangerous. Many people have died riding it.
We are under Israeli military restrictions in terms of some of the things that we can film, but it's important to be in there. What a slow drive for the president as he approaches his golf club. 4 more years! Free wherever you get your news. I'm Mark Stone and I'm Sky's correspondent based here in Washington, D.C.
Russia appears to be relishing the Trump-Zelensky spat, saying it shows a lack of diplomatic skill from the Ukrainian leader. Here's some of what the Kremlin had to say.
It's clear that someone will have to make a considerable effort in terms of dialogue with Washington in order to somehow neutralise the probably unpleasant aftertaste that probably remained in the White House after talking with Zelensky. And it's obvious that this will not be easy. Besides, of course, it's very important that someone makes Zelensky change his position. Someone must make Zelensky want peace. If the Europeans can do this, honour and praise to them. Zelensky has shown a complete lack of diplomatic skills at the very least.
That was Dmitry Peskov, the Kremlin spokesperson. Well, joining me now is former British Defence Attaché to Moscow and Kiev, John Foreman. Thank you so much for joining us here on the programme. It's quite extraordinary, actually, to listen there to Peskov, more or less mimicking what Donald Trump has been saying, that, you know, President Zelenskyy should want peace and that he should change his attitude effectively.
Yeah, good evening, Yalda. I think Russia's intent all along was to paint Ukraine as a non-state, an illegitimate state which has no right to exist. Therefore, by extension, Ukraine's democratic elected leaders also have no legitimacy. And they're actually focusing, I think, on Zelenskyy because they're trying to exacerbate, punch the bruise of the relationship between America and Zelenskyy, which fell out on Friday. So it's very much the Russian approach is to exploit weakness and discord elsewhere. That I don't think they started it, but they're very good at pouncing on it, as you said. And actually, as you said in your introduction, they're relishing the spat going on between Europe, Ukraine, and the United States.
How do you think they're discussing this moment, other than relishing it? Their position would not necessarily change just because they're seeing shifts in the United States? Or do you think they're sort of recalibrating, how they approach and seize this moment?
No, I think their grand strategy has been consistent throughout. We mentioned about Ukraine. They want to subjugate Ukraine, destroy its statehood. They don't regard Ukrainians as an independent people, so they want to destroy Ukraine's national identity. But I think it's wider than that. I think they're also trying to seek a reset of the whole European security architecture, which we've enjoyed since the Cold War, and also to re-establish themselves as a great power on the world scene to try and divide the world up between China and the United States. So I think that's consistent, and I think they're quite happy how things are going. I think they're taking a back seat and letting it all play out between the Ukrainians and Trump, because I think they're delighted to see the splits. They're delighted to see Trump reiterating some of the Kremlin's talking points, speaking warmly about Putin and slamming Zelenskyy. And also I think they probably enjoy Trump's credulousness of trusting the Russians, despite all the things that Russia's done over the last 10 to 15 years of breaking every agreement that Russia's signed. So I think I already thought they were in a winning position. And I think they see the recent spats, the last 2.5 weeks, as moving things in their direction, but noting that a lot of things will have to come out during the talks.
Yeah, John, I have about a minute, and I just want to ask you quickly. Do you think there is a scenario where Vladimir Putin could overplay his hand and get all of this wrong?
Yes, I think so. I think there's a risk. I think they think we're quite happy how things are going, and they'll carry on pressing on the battlefield and information and economically. But I think there's a risk of Trump's capriciousness. He could change position quite quickly, and to say that Russia becomes the obstacle and actually brings down the hammer of more sanctions and more isolation, more weapons to Ukraine. And I think the second thing Putin has to be careful of is making sure that any deal he brings home is actually sellable to those veterans who've been fighting and the hard right in his own country.
Yeah, indeed. Thank you so much, John, for joining us here on the programme. Well, that's it from me and the team from the world. Stay with us because, of course, Anna is back next with Sky News at 10. We're back tomorrow night, and we are expecting that major announcement from Donald Trump on Ukraine. So as soon as that happens, we, of course, will be bringing you all the headlines here on Sky News. And, of course, we will have a special programme on Bangladesh as well. For now, good night.